Hello you guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome back to a palette week day 2, where every single day for 7 straight days I will be posting some sort of palette themed content. And I'm really excited because today I'm going to be doing my updated the palette tag, or the eyeshadow palette tag, that was created by Samantha March and Allie Glines, and this will be my 2024 version. I have filmed a version of this or updated this every single year since it was created. I will have Samantha and Allie's videos linked down below, and I actually mixed their first with their second. So I have 21 eyeshadow palettes to share. They did 2 separate tag videos with separate questions. So I have 21 palettes to share with you guys today. I am filming later in the day. This makeup has been on for about 9 hours. I tried to touch up my eyeshadow a little bit because I did film my Deca Panning Project pan right before filming this, and then I edited that video and I was like, ooh, the makeup is looking rougher than I thought. So we're gonna just ignore this. I want to make sure I truly do have eyeshadow content every single day for 7 straight days, and I'm trying to fiddle with the lighting, so if it's not perfect, I apologize. Anyway, if you guys are interested in hearing me talk about some of my favorite palettes, my most colorful, my most affordable, my most expensive, all the things, all the palettes, stay tuned. First, if you have yet to subscribe to my channel and you like project painting content, palette themed content, or just chit-chatting about makeup, I'd love if you'd consider subscribing before moving on. And other than that, let's jump into the video. One other housekeeping thing to get out of the way before we jump into it is I do have my Invisalign trays in, so if I'm sounding a little funky, or if you're like, girl, what is going on in your mouth, that is it. Also would love to know what kind of palette themed content you'll want to see from your girl next. Let me know in the comments. But let's jump into the questions. I will leave the questions linked in my description box, not linked, listed in my description box as well. And let me know some of your answers in the comments below. Okay, we are gonna start with my all-time favorite eyeshadow palette. And this one was really tough. I recently posted my 10 favorite eyeshadow palettes of all time. And I would say, if you were to ask me my current top favorite palette in my collection, I would likely say, it'd be really, really difficult to choose a number 1. But the first thing that comes to mind is the Glaminatrix Nearly Natural palette. But if we were talking all-time favorite palette, I have to give it to my Natasha Denona Gold palette. This palette, in my opinion, is just truly something special. I have all of the brown shades that I personally feel like I could ever want, just my perfect matte browns. When I think of the matte browns that I want in an eyeshadow palette, these are them. And then on top of that, this palette is truly what made me start to fall in love with and feel comfortable with green eyeshadow. And now I've gone on to become obsessed with green eyeshadow palette, or green eyeshadow. So I just have such a fond place in my heart for the Natasha Denona Gold. And truly, I would say of all time, this would be my all-time fave palette. The next question is a new favorite palette, and for that I'm going with a neutral and green eyeshadow palette, and I'm going with the Unearthly Cosmetics Sorcerer's Smoke eyeshadow palette. This is what this looks like. I was going between this and the Flying Fiddles eyeshadow palette from Adept Cosmetics, but I decided to go with Sorcerer's Smoke because for every day I feel like this eyeshadow palette is just a little bit more versatile when I'm thinking of my everyday life. This is a palette that I can reach into very, very easily to create work appropriate looks, and I have enough neutral matte shades in this palette to work with. Whereas in the Flying Fiddles, I just feel like I want one lighter matte shade in that palette, and then that palette would be pure perfection. I absolutely love the green quad of shades here, and I think this is such a special palette. Unearthly makes truly such a special, punchy, metallic, shifty shade. You just truly can't beat it. So a new favorite is the Unearthly Sorcerer's Smoke eyeshadow palette. The next question is an eyeshadow palette that I keep for the memories, and for that I had to go with my Huda Beauty Mercury Retrograde eyeshadow palette. When I look into this eyeshadow palette, for the most part, this color story just isn't it for me anymore. Now granted, there's still some shades that I love. Gold Glitch is one that I would call out, Supernova, Galaxy, and even Nebula. But overall, this eyeshadow palette just is not a favorite reach for me anymore. However, I just remember how excited I was to purchase this palette and to own this palette, and this palette really got me into what Mercury Retrograde really even is, and I just have such fond feelings towards this eyeshadow palette that even if I decide to like retire this eyeshadow palette, I will likely keep it around and just like not actually use the shades. This is definitely one I keep around for the memories. Next is an underrated eyeshadow palette, and hear me out on this one. So I have the Bella Beauté Bella Beauté Bar Angles of Illumination eyeshadow palette. I actually have one of the shades on my eyes today, and I feel like you might be shocked to, like, you maybe wouldn't have guessed that it's this shade right here, which is in Sunlight, because in the pan this almost looks more like an iridescent sort of green shade, but on my eyes it has this really beautiful teal shift. Now granted, I do have it for the most part over like a deeper green shade. I have it over, again, for the most part, but not really in the inner corner. I have it over this green shade out of the NARS Climax eyeshadow palette. I think this is beautiful, and why I say this is an underrated palette is I feel like this palette kind of like came and went. I feel like Bella Beauté Bar palettes in general get a lot of hype and a lot of buzz, but I feel like no one talked about this or just didn't talk about this palette for very long. I heard some creators say like this wasn't a favorite palette because it's pretty repetitive, which I will say I do kind of understand that. Like these two shades specifically are very, very similar, but they're also blue brown shades, which I personally can't complain because I love a blue brown shade. But I feel like even looking into this, you might think it is repetitive because there's like a lot of blue up here, but on the eyes there is quite a difference in some of these shades in just the way that they shift. I know some other creators have also stated it's an all shimmer palette, which I do agree. Sometimes I don't love an all shimmer palette, but this has magnetic pans. Like you can build your own palette, you can do your own thing with it, and I truly have been so excited and inspired to just reach into this palette, to pick one shade to just top on a look like I did today. I wasn't super excited to reach for this NARS palette, but I'm working on it no pan left behind style, and I was like, okay, I can do like a base kind of more neutral, boring sort of look, but then I can pop this on top, and I love the way that this look turned out. Again, this has been really on my eyes for about 8 or 9 hours, so don't judge too hard, but I really think that this palette is truly something special, and I don't feel like this one got enough buzz, when in general I feel like typically the Bella Beauté Bar palettes do get a lot of buzz. Okay, next up is not a favorite but can't get rid of, and for that I have these two Natasha Denona eyeshadow palettes, and both of mine look different right now because I have been making my own kind of custom Natasha Denona midi palettes. But the Natasha Denona Love eyeshadow palette, I just feel extremely confused by the color story. Like my brain does not work with the pinks and the purples in that way to feel creatively inspired by the palette. But I have almost every Natasha Denona midi palette, and I can kind of mix and match and create my own BYOPs of these Natasha Denona midis, which is a reason I wouldn't get rid of it. Then I also have the Natasha Denona Zendo, which again looks very different. The Zendo I felt like was really lacking in quality just compared to a lot of the other Natasha Denona midi palettes. But again, I can't get rid of them because I feel like I collect them at this point, and also I can kind of mix and match shades. And there are shades from each of these palettes that I do like. So didn't love the palette as a whole, but also won't get rid of them. Next up is a favorite collab palette, and I was going between Hella the original and Hella the second collaboration with Odin's Eye and Angelica, and I decided to go with the Hella 2 collab, and I really couldn't pick between the two eyeshadow palettes, the Trick or Treat or the Lil Ghost eyeshadow palette. I will say when these released, I was like, okay, like want to support Angie, but also like what do I do with these color stories? I have had so much fun creating looks with both of these eyeshadow palettes, mixing and matching. I just think maybe the color stories don't look like super easy to, but I actually feel like they do. I don't know, I felt so creatively inspired by this collection. This green, like the greens in this, the blues and purples, and I love them. Love them so much. I feel like Angie did such a good job. I also love her Kaleidos palette. Like Angie just truly kills it when it comes to collaborating with brands and creating eyeshadow palettes. Next up is an eyeshadow palette that I wasn't expecting to love, and maybe I feel like I was expecting to like this eyeshadow palette, because I wouldn't purchase a palette that I wasn't expecting to at bare minimum like. but I wasn't expecting to become so incredibly obsessed with the Danessa Myricks Lightwork Volume 3 palette that it would become one of those products on my channel that I literally will find any and every excuse possible to talk about. I feel like this, as well as Buxom Seychelles and like Lawless Forget the Filler, are some of my most discussed products of all time. So this is what this palette looks like. I also love Danessa Myricks Lightwork Volume 4 and 5, but after falling so head over heels in love with this eyeshadow palette, I was truly expecting to love both of those. I just feel like the Danessa Myricks formula provides something so unique and so special, and just, I love it so much. The shade Polaris is one of my most favorite eyeshadows in my entire collection. It's this really beautiful iridescent cream, like green to gold to yellow. Like, it's such a beautiful shade, and then you can layer other shades on top of this shade to create just so many different eyeshadow shades, dimensional looks, things like that. Oh my gosh, I'm looking at it right now. It literally shifts from like yellow to green, and I don't know if I'm gonna be able to capture it. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to capture like the green, but it is just such a cool eyeshadow shade. I love it so much. Definitely was not expecting to love this eyeshadow palette as much as I did, but so happy that I did, because this comes in at a pretty hefty price tag. Next up is an eyeshadow palette that sparks joy, and for that I have the Glaminatrix Nearly Natural palette, and I love this eyeshadow palette. It is so pretty, and the reason this one sparks so much joy for me is this is the palette that I brought with me to Las Vegas to the Creators and Friends event. It is the eyeshadow palette I wore to the Creators and Friends event, and I just remember like standing in the bathroom with Emily from Emily and Max, getting ready, and just like having just such good conversation. Like, I remember leaving, like weeks leading up to the Creators and Friends event, I was so anxious and so nervous. Emily and I ended up staying together, and I remember thinking like, what if like we don't get along? What if actually she thinks I'm like so weird? Because I feel like maybe I'm weirder in person than I like come across on camera. And I just remember being so anxious about it, but literally it was just like we clicked so well, and I just enjoyed actually like getting to meet Emily in person, because I feel like you create a YouTube channel and then like you never think you're really gonna make friends on the internet. Maybe you do, and then like you start to make friends on the internet, but you're like, okay, well, I'm never actually gonna meet this person in person, and then you do, and you're like, well, dang, I really actually like you, and now Emily and I want to go to Banff together, and that like definitely needs to happen at some point, Emily. Okay. Anyway, I just have such fond memories with this eyeshadow palette for that reason. All right, next question is, show your newest eyeshadow palette, and the newest palette to my collection is the It's Belle Cosmetics Under the Full Moon eyeshadow palette. Let me tell you, I definitely wanted to purchase another eyeshadow palette from It's Belle, because I really enjoy my 9-pan that I own from them, which is also an all shimmer palette. And right as this palette was releasing, like 2 days before, I don't know why I was thinking of the Nabla, like the 6-pan blue eyeshadow palette, and I was feeling a bit of regret for decluttering that eyeshadow palette. And I literally, like a day before I saw the teaser pictures of this eyeshadow palette, I went onto the Ulta website and had like added the Nabla 6-pan eyeshadow palette to my cart and was thinking about repurchasing it. Enter a teaser photo for this palette right here, and I was like, oh my goodness, I feel like this is just like that Nabla 6-pan with 6 more pans of eyeshadow. And I was so excited about it. I haven't even swatched this. This literally arrived to me yesterday, but I feel like the shade Moonglade was exactly what I was looking for in what I felt like I was missing or regretted decluttering out of Nabla, the blue one. I can't even remember what it was called. And then there's this really beautiful kind of silvery, tealy, bluey sort of shade up here, as well as like a lavender shimmer. I was like, I literally couldn't ask for more. So I'm really excited to put this to the test. Like I said, I haven't even swatched it yet. I haven't tried it on my eyes, but this is the newest eyeshadow palette to my collection. And then next question is the oldest palette in your collection, and I have 2 to share here. So if we're going off like actual age of the actual palette, it would be the Dose of Colors. I believe the Dose of Colors Baked Bronze. I'm almost positive. This is what my palette looks like. It's ancient. But before I owned Baked Browns, I did own Tartelette in Bloom. And then Tartelette in Bloom was getting really dry and really crusty and aged, and she was just ready to retire for good. Like, she was ready for the grave. So she went to the grave. And then I missed her, so I repurchased Tartelette in Bloom. So this color story, the Tartelette in Bloom is the oldest palette in my collection in terms of like owning the Tartelette in Bloom color story, but the age of this palette, because it replaced the exact same palette, am I even making sense, is the oldest. Okay, we're gonna move on. Next up is show your most expensive palette. And my most expensive palettes would be my Pat McGrath's, because they're 128 now, but I have a lot of them. So I actually just wanted to shout out a Danessa Myricks palette again. This is the Lightwork Volume 5, and this retails for $125. Very, very, very pricey. Well worth it in my opinion. I already cannot wait to see what Lightwork Volume 6 is gonna look like. And what I love about this year's Lightwork palette is these middle shades were split pans, so it's almost as though you're getting 18 shades. Well, you are getting 18 shades in this palette. So I know 125 is a lot, but if you think about like how many different tones, textures, and pans you're getting in this palette, personally I don't think it's that bad. I'd rather buy this over a Pat McGrath palette any day. Next up is show your most affordable eyeshadow palette, and my most affordable eyeshadow palettes are the ColourPop 9-pan palettes. I don't really remember. I want to say they're like 14 or were 14. I'm not sure what they are now, but I have Going Coconuts, Wild Child, and Lil Ray of Sunshine. The next question is to show your most colorful eyeshadow palette, and for that I have the most rainbow palette in my collection. It's the Glamlight Cake eyeshadow palette, this lovely thing right here. This is a palette that I just don't get a lot of use out of, but another one that I feel like I can't get myself to declutter, because I feel like if I need a vibrant color, this palette has got my back. Glamlight also makes an incredible formula, so by far this is my most colorful eyeshadow palette. Next is to show my smallest eyeshadow palette. So I literally went through all my quads and sized them up against one another, and my smallest quad in my collection is my LH Cosmetics Shimmer Saga palette. She's small, but boy does she pack a punch. These shades are absolutely beautiful. I love all 4 of them. I feel like they add something truly special to a look. Oftentimes if I'm feeling like I don't really know what I want to do like for the day, a few days for work, especially within the past month, I've done like a base, like neutral matte shades using my Natasha Denona I Need a Nude, and then I'll just pop on one of these shades and I always feel so pretty. And then next is show my largest eyeshadow palette, and for that I have the Glamlight Ice Cream palette. This is a 40 shade eyeshadow palette, I believe. 2, 4, 5, 2, 4, 6, sorry, 30. So then I guess I also have a large ColourPop palette that's also 30 shades, but I wanted to showcase this one because it's beautiful and I literally can't wait to pull this out for the spring. Okay, next question is show your palette with the best memory. For that I have my Natasha Denona Glam eyeshadow palette, and recently I went to Mamma Mia, the like musical, not on Broadway but at the Orpheum in Minneapolis, and I went with my daughter and it was such a fun time. Mamma Mia is one of our favorite movies, and it's something that was like a favorite like situation when I was younger. Literally, I remember my sister and I would literally listen to the ABBA like Mamma Mia CD over, and like it was like on repeat for like 2 years. And so then when my daughter became a lover of Mamma Mia, it was like we got to relive that experience all over again. So my mom, my sister, and my daughter went to Mamma Mia, and it was such a fun time, such a good memory, literally such a good show, and definitely one of the best memories I have gotten to experience thus far this year. Next up is show a palette that's worth the hype, and for me that is the Cosmic Brushes The Muse eyeshadow palette. I get it, you guys. I understand the hype with these palettes. I want to own every single Cosmic Brushes palette that exists after using this eyeshadow palette. This is such a good value. I think it was $26 for this, and I feel like you can use a code. The mattes truly like pretty much blend themselves, which is really saying something for an indie brand, and an indie brand that comes in at such an affordable cost. And then the shimmers, the metallics, the foils, the duochromes in this eyeshadow palette are so incredibly impressive. I was literally blown away by this eyeshadow palette, so I definitely feel like that's worth the hype. Next up is Show a palette that is not worth the hype, and for me, I feel like that is very specifically the Pat McGrath Divine Rose eyeshadow palette. I just feel like this palette, and if this is a palette you love, I really apologize. I just feel like this is such a boring, like I look at this and I feel instantly so bored, almost like where it like makes you like a little bit annoyed. Like I'm like, really, like what is this? Even though I feel like it's such like a neutral, like a beautiful neutral eyeshadow palette, like it really is, but I look at it and I just feel like it's so boring. And I feel like the special shades within this eyeshadow palette, with the exception of like this sparkly shade, are just really nothing to write home. Like I'm like, this is not worth it. I really don't think any Pat McGrath eyeshadow palette is worth the $128. If you can get it 30 to 40% off, then we can talk. But for me, Pat McGrath. Next is a favorite palette from a favorite brand, and for me, I decided to select the Huda Beauty Rose Quartz eyeshadow palette. I love Huda Beauty eyeshadows, and I have for such a long time, from her Mini Obsessions palettes to the Mercury Retrograde. And there's been some duds in there too, but I always look forward to what Huda Beauty is releasing for eyeshadows. I don't buy every single release. I didn't buy the cream eyeshadow palettes because I didn't think that I would get use out of them. But the Rose Quartz palette is an ethereal lover's dream. This is such a beautiful romantic toned eyeshadow palette with some really, really special shades. I love that Huda Beauty includes so many different textures and tones in her 18 pan eyeshadow palettes, and I am so in love with the shade Cosmic Love, Blissful, and Moon Magic. But I also think the shade Energize is such a beautiful like golden metallic shade as well. And even Lovestone, the kind of like wet creamy sort of shade, I actually really enjoy. So for me, when I look at all of the palettes that I own from Huda Beauty, this one would be my favorite. And then the final question is show your most used eyeshadow palette, and it would have been ABH Sultry. But that palette is no longer. So I believe my next most used eyeshadow palette is my Natasha Denona Mini Nude, especially when I think about palettes that like I naturally reach for so frequently. Like yes, there's palettes that I've reached for a lot for like specifically brows, specifically because it's in an eyeshadow project of some kind. But when it comes to just like I need something quick, easy, on the go, this is one of my most used palettes of all time. This is a palette that was so used and so loved that some of the shades had shattered, and I went on to repurchase this palette because I wanted to have it. So most used eyeshadow palette is my Natasha Denona Mini Nude. And after that, you guys, those are all of the questions and all of the palettes that I have to share with you. Again, would love to know some of your answers to these questions in the comments below. But that is going to wrap it up for today's video. Thank you guys so much for sticking around to watch and for supporting me and my channel as you guys always do. I love you guys so much, and I will catch you in tomorrow's video. Bye.